Hello. I have a story to tell. I will not be releasing my name or the name of my colleagues, as I fear what could happen if I do. Candlelight Company will be able to find me eventually, but I hope to stall their progress as much as possible while still releasing the truth. I fear what could happen to my friends and family if the owners of Candlelight put together the pieces while they still have something to gain from potentially holding them hostage, or worse. A few years ago, I was working as an archaeologist. I got little work after accidentally destroying a 2,000-year-old can used to hold spaghetti by the Roggenian people. Despite my prestigious degree, I had to work at Roggen's delicious canned spaghetti in the expired spaghetti reuse division. The pay was so low I couldn't even afford the worst apartments in the city I lived in. Knowing I would be in deep debt soon, I decided to throw away my old life. I bought a fake ID, passport, and driver's license. I went by a different name, changed my hairstyle and grew a beard, even working out excessively to change my build. I hitchhiked to Colorado, where I knew land was cheap. I worked odd jobs at farms, but had to move around a lot as inspectors from Roggen's came looking for me. I knew I needed a good gig to escape the country. I took a wild chance when I saw an amateur archaeological dig in the nearby city of Roggen. They needed a professional archaeologist to assist them. I was surprised, as Roggen, Colorado is the largest city in America, and I was sure that they could have found someone already. Regardless, I signed up, taking a gamble and using my old name, just in case I needed to show proof of my degree. I was shocked when I got an email telling me that I was hired onto the project. I read through the email, noticing that the dig was sponsored by the prestigious Candlelight Company. I waited out the month before the dig in a shitty motel, the cheapest one I could find. When I arrived at the dig site, I was surprised to see no one there. A small table was erected near the entrance of a cave, which I assumed was the location of the dig. On the table was a can of Roggen's delicious canned water, along with a bundle of cloth. I picked up the bundle and unfurled it. Inside was a small chisel, trowel, flashlight, and a letter. I opened the letter to see a Roggen's Funtime Pizzeria order slip. It had two shittily drawn clipperts of pizza on each side of the lettering spelling out the brand. They were more crust than pizza, with putrid mustard yellow cheese and only 2 slices of pepperoni, or at least I think that's what they were supposed to be. Below this were 2 small lines. Written on them were the words,
Hello, I am not Roggen. I am an archaeologist. We are in the cave. You should come down when you read this.
I realized that the dig must have started and quickly gulped down the can of water. I thought it tasted weird, so I checked the label, noticing the ingredients included fentanyl and isoflurane. I thought this was strange, but continued down into the cave. It was pitch black, and the shitty McRoggen's joyous meal toy flashlight barely illuminated anything in front of me. I often found myself stumbling, almost breaking open my skull on the rocks. The inside of the cave was slippery, and my mind felt hazy, which I was confused by, as the can of water should have woken me up more. Regardless, I continued through the cave until I stumbled into a puddle. It was fairly deep, but not very wide, as the result of forming in a natural divot. I pointed my flashlight down into the liquid I was standing in, nauseated when I saw what it was. It was thick, sticky, and red. A partially shattered hard hat lay soaking in the puddle. A backpack lay torn open on a ledge next to the puddle. Red streaks cascaded down from the ledge down into the puddle. I wasn't sure how the team could have brought so much tomato soup down here, but that was just a plain waste of food. I continued on, walking and stumbling on for what felt like hours in the blackness. The cave was much longer than I expected it would be. Time lost all sense, seemingly an alien concept to the ancient rock surrounding me. My existence was confined to a 2-foot diameter, dim ellipse of light slowly crawling through the unyielding darkness. The cave seemed to constrict me and force away my breath as I traveled, despite the fact I could still stand up straight and spread my arms wide without touching the walls in most places. The air was undisturbed by human presence. The taste of chalk and dust assaulted my nostrils, carried by the damp and stale air. I felt directionless, despite the linear nature of the cave. It seemed that the world only was allowed to exist where the strained beam of light or where my skin grazed the stone walls, slick with a layer of mud. I felt that, were I to abruptly change direction, the entire cave would shift and ensnare me, only bringing me deeper into the looming abyss. As I lost myself entirely to thought, losing track of the world in front of me, I stumbled, letting out an involuntary gasp as I felt myself tumble into the unknown. For a brief moment, no part of me was in contact with the substance of the earth. I let go of my flashlight, the beam of light allowing me to see anything at all violently convulsing and dancing on the cave ceiling, before a metallic impact sound echoed through the void and the spasmodic beam of light vanished from the world. The only conscious thought in my head was that I had no way to judge the height of my drop. However, I fell for only but an instant, colliding with terra firma in what must have only been a single second. The wind was knocked out of me, and my chest ached with an intense bruise. I lay with my face against the cold stone, gasping at wisps of stale, dead air, before gingerly lifting myself to my hands and knees, crawling over to the cave wall, sitting with my back to it, and wheezing for a few minutes as my pounding heart and shaky limbs calmed. I soon gathered myself and began to look for my flashlight. I soon found it. By some miracle, it could still work, even after its collision, but only barely. The light would flicker every time it moved, even slightly, but it was still better than nothing. I wanted more than anything to leave, but decided it was likely that I was closer to the team than I was to the exit. I pushed forward, albeit cautiously. My suspicions were correct, but in a way I never would have imagined. I began to notice small carvings in the rock. Upon examining them, I found them to be somewhat weathered, signifying that they were indeed ancient. I was nearing the focus of the expedition. I couldn't quite tell what they aimed to depict, half from the bizarre shapes etched into the cave walls, half from being smoothed out and worn down by thousands of years of slowly dripping water. They formed strange and alien shapes, dancing and twisting in a wind which no longer graced this prehistoric crypt. As I continued through the passageway, I couldn't stop my mind from conjuring forth images of bizarre rituals conducted before the birth of civilization, and indeed, perhaps before the birth of man. The cave slowly transitioned to carved stone, making it easier to traverse. I began to see modern belongings scattered across the ground. They appeared to be identical to those given to me. Despite this, however, I heard no sounds beyond my echoing footsteps, rising heartbeat, and raspy breath. In this space, any sound made was amplified by 1,000-fold and cut through the silence like a knife. By all accounts, I should have heard the team by now. The silence screamed warnings of a lurking horror, but my irrational mind forced me forward. I began to notice that the floor shape was not a perfect rectangle, as I first thought. There was an ever so slight angle, making the passage wide out. Indeed, the same effect applied to the walls and ceiling as well. The floor was slanted downwards, the ceiling upwards, and the walls outwards. The new room would have been welcomed in my previous claustrophobic state, but now, there seemed to be so much more room than there should have been, and I found myself pressed against a wall and shuffling along, flicking my flashlight across the hallway back and forth, making sure nothing was tailing me or crouching just out of view. I hid my mouth in my shirt and slowed my breathing down as much as possible, tiptoeing across the ground to silence myself as well as I could. The trail of supplies left by the team thickened as I progressed, and I soon found myself having to step over bags strewn on the ground. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't turn back. I had to see what lay ahead, and I didn't want to turn my back to it, whatever it may be. By the end of the passage, it was well over 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall. Even in spite of its apparent age, the craftsmanship remained sharp and clean. If this place was as old as was claimed, it was a work of genuine mastery. I swallowed hard and shone my flashlight beyond the threshold of the room before me. I was surprised to see the size of it. My flashlight fell on some ornately carved wall, barely visible in the dim, flickering light. I foolishly stepped forward. I was entranced by what I saw of the carvings. I stumbled on something, painfully falling on my knee. I turned my flashlight back to see something which sent a chill down my spine. A giant empty can of Roggen's delicious canned spaghetti. I rolled it over, examining it. Something was burned onto it. More than one something, in fact. Nervous sweat rolled down my face as I put my hand on one of the marks. It was unmistakable. Human hands. I quickly retracted my hand, wiping the soot off on my pants. I looked around, using my flashlight to see. There were countless cans of various sizes and burn marks around the chamber, all of them looking unsettlingly human. One of them, in the corner, seemed more three-dimensional than the others. I carefully made my way over. Looking down, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was unmistakably in the shape of a human being, curled into a fetal position. I kicked at it with my foot, trying to make sense of whether or not it was real. When the ash was disturbed, something poked out from the pile. I crouched down and picked it up to see a human femur, charred black in places. In an instant, I threw it at the wall and stumbled backwards, turning sideways to vomit onto the floor. I spun wildly around, looking for the passageway I had come from. Yet, it seemed to have vanished. I ran over to where I thought it was and ran my hand over the stone. There were two slight, barely noticeable cuts in the stone, the same width of the passageway, and running up and down the entire height of the room. I had been trapped. I wildly grabbed the can I had stumbled on and pulled up on it. Surely enough, my suspicions were confirmed when I found a narrow hole in the ground, a thin wire attached to the can snaking down into it. I sat in place for some time, hanging my head. I thought I was going to spend the last few torturous days, or even hours of my life in this underground tomb, until I succumbed to dehydration or suffocation. I began scouring the chamber. The carvings depicted strange one-eyed creatures, with spherical bodies, long thin limbs, and tall crests. Some were depicted spearing what appeared to be goblins in some sort of hunt. Some were depicted as mining copper, which I knew from the arrows pointing at mines saying copper here. Some were depicted as flying using some sort of strange hat with a propeller on it. On one side of the room, I found something. Something important. It was a section of the wall which appeared to be pushed back. On closer inspection, I saw that it appeared to be some sort of stone slab held in place by a hollow section of wall to one side. I examined the carving on it. It seemed to be something vaguely human-shaped, rising out of a pit filled with what must have been water. Only its upper body was visible. All below the midsection was still submerged. Strangely, it seemed the body was more akin to an outline of a person as a contiguous mass, like if they hunched their arms to their body. Horns jutted out from the head at seemingly random intervals. Roggens appeared to be pouring cans of Roggen's delicious canned spaghetti into the pit. I pulled the chisel out of my bag and began to use my trowel as a hammer. The stone was surprisingly soft, but it still took what must have been hours to make noticeable progress. I worked feverishly, never stopping to rest. I knew I had to get out, and get out soon. Eventually, at what felt like the peak of exhaustion, a crack I had formed in the section of wall, near the part which was in the divot in the main wall finally split, with a thunderous cracking sound. In desperation, I slammed myself against a wall, feeling it give a little. Again and again, I struck the wall, until, at long last, it gave way, toppling to the ground with a deafening slam, kicking up a cloud of dust. I looked around, my weakened flashlight revealing another passageway. This one looked less well-made than the previous one, with uneven stone walls, a bumpy and angled floor, and unfinished ceiling that still resembled that of an entirely natural cave. The passageway was smaller, only barely having enough room to fit the now broken door, and it seemed to get smaller and smaller. I figured that no matter where it led, there was at least a chance there was a way out. It was better than starving in the previous antechamber. Soon, I found myself hunched over, then crawling on my hands and knees, and finally, crawling on my stomach. The walls made it difficult for me to move my limbs, and I had to move by awkwardly shuffling my torso back and wriggling forward like a worm. It was painfully slow, and I felt the rough stone ceiling scraping against my back, wincing whenever my head collided with any part of the tunnel. I had to hold my claustrophobia. I knew that I couldn't panic, or I could potentially get trapped. At the worst point, I had maybe a half-inch of clearance on all sides. My ragged breath grew frantic in the stale air, even oxygen was a limited supply in the passage. I closed my eyes, shuffling forward for what felt like hours. When my head stuck out into the open, I laughed with joy, despite my desperate situation. I had feared that the passageway would continue to narrow into solid stone, into a dead end, at which point I would have no room to move backwards and would die, unable to move, trapped deep below the earth. Due to shaking off my old identity, no one would come looking for me. No one would remember me. My body would be eternally trapped until some movement of the earth, or perhaps the glacial growth of stalactites, would entomb my long-dead remains. At the very least, I would now have the dignity of dying in a somewhat open space. I soon got my shoulders through, and then my arms. After that, it was only a matter of frantic kicking, tugging, and writhing before I tumbled out, falling maybe 2 feet to a smooth stone ground. I first turned and looked up at the passage I entered from. It formed a rectangular hole in the curved wall of this new chamber. It was maybe 18 inches wide and 8 inches tall. It formed a pitch-black maw, and I shuddered, now fully understanding what I had gone through. I turned, hunched over, and dry-heaved. Not a single ounce of Roggen's delicious canned spaghetti was left in my stomach, the last food I consumed before my trip. I looked above the hole to see something strange. It was what appeared to be the Candlelight logo, carved into the stone wall. Regardless, I shined my flashlight across the chamber to look around. There appeared to be various holes, similar to the one I entered from, regularly spaced around the cylindrical space. The room was enormous, at least 100 yards across and 20 yards tall. The floor was slightly beveled, forming a sort of subtle funnel that led down to the center of the room, a massive pit which formed the bulk of the floor space. The pit was pitch black, and my dim light illuminated none of the inside of it. Upon noticing the hole, I grew suddenly uneasy. What the fuck was this place? What was it? Surely this place was impossible, no human hands could have built this, at least so far underground? I saw myself with great, unthinkable clarity. Why did I push on, so deep in? Why did I enter this hell because a simple note told me to? It was like I had no control over my own actions. It was like this was all scripted, like I couldn't control myself. It was like I was part of some stupid plot which needed someone to drive it forward, resulting in characters acting in abnormal or stupid ways in order to suit the needs of the story. But the fact I know this means it can't be true, right? These are my words, they can't have been written out for me? They can't be spoken from the mouth of someone else? A knot filled my gut, twisting through my chest, holding my heart captive and clenching down on my lungs. I walked towards the pit, teetering on the brink. I threw my light into the pit. I didn't need it anymore. Somehow, I could see clearly into the pit. There was no light. I knew that perfectly well. It was as pitch black as the world can possibly get. Yet, I could still see. As if something had fundamentally changed, as if my vision wasn't truly vision. The pit was filled with something shifting and red. I couldn't comprehend what it was, but I could comprehend what it wasn't. I knew it couldn't have been, so my mind filled it in as that. Canned spaghetti. An ocean of canned spaghetti filled in what filled the pit. As if the textures in a video game were swapped to something different than what they should be. It wasn't canned spaghetti, but it was the easiest thing for my mind to see it as, so that's what it was. It was canned spaghetti. So much of it. So much more canned spaghetti was in this pit than what Earth could feasibly hold, all somehow held in this pit, a portal to a sea of something that was an absence of canned spaghetti. A dull pain spread through my head as I stared down. Suddenly, something shifted in the pit. It looked vaguely humanoid, like a something made of something which was not the canned spaghetti I was seeing. It was a slight movement, like stirring in sleep. But, when it did move, the dull pain exploded, blooming like a flower into an agonizing array of unfurling layers of consciousness, peeling away from the core of my being. I fell to my knees, my palms grinding into my eyes, my fingers forcing their way into my ears, into my nose, and tugging at my lips, which were pulled away from my clenched teeth in a hideous grimace. A muffled, involuntary scream, more a quieted groan really, desperately struggled its way through my straining throat and torn vocal cords, and a wall of cracking teeth, two enamel rows trying to force past each other. It was then, I felt something thin, wet, sticky, touch my forehead, like a fingertip. It slowly slid through skin and past my skin, curling and settling in my brain like a worm. The pain I felt reached its zenith as my spine curved backwards, my body forming a grotesque hook shape before I fell backwards, my head colliding with the solid stone. Whether it was some last-ditch self-preservation mechanic of my mind or the aforementioned impact which blew out my consciousness like a candle, I cannot say. I awoke an unknown time later, with an arm, much of my torso, and my head dangling precariously into the pit, my belly facing what must have been up in this directionless void. I lifted myself, gathering my sprawled appendages, which seemed somehow so distant now. I felt my face and my throat. There was no damage. Yet, the memory of the unbelievable pain still haunted me, draining the life from my being. I looked back down into the pit to see nothing. Only a still, black pool of stagnant cave water filled it. I looked around, sensing a door nearby. I walked over to where I felt it was. I grabbed where I felt a doorknob should be, twisting it and pulling. Cool wind blew through and enveloped my face. I turned back to look at the passageway, seeing something which should have terrified me. Something somewhat in similar form to a human and burning with orange flames crawled out from the passageway that I had entered from. It was about 5 feet tall, with a round spherical body, one singular eye in the center of it. A tall crest jutted out from the top. It had long, skinny arms and legs. After it got out, it stood, staring at me. After a long moment, it raised an arm, as if to wave at me. I turned, leaving the chamber. As soon as I fully exited the doorway, it slammed shut behind me. I turned around to look, seeing only grassy hillside. No trace of a door. I surveyed my surroundings, seeing a familiar cave and a familiar table, only during what should have been a beautiful, starry night. A singular slip of paper lay on it. It was a piece of a candlelight comic, cut out from the last page. Delicately drawn letters spelled out. "Thank you for your support. It was dated almost a decade from the day I entered the cave. I let it fall from my hand and flutter to the ground. I write this on a public computer in a local library. I intend to post this anonymously on Roggen. I suspect that I am dead. This post is simply the echoes left behind by the soul which once inhabited this body. Something tore it from what speaks to you now, placed a vestige of itself in the original inhabitant's place. Something has followed me from the cave. Whether what I call I lives or dies is irrelevant. It has followed me out of the hell beneath the earth. I, this forsaken husk of a body, intend to destroy myself. I know full well that I am as human as a wad of clay now. I am possessed by no emotions, no desires, no will. My dreams are empty, and I only write this based on muscle memory from life. I cannot hope to contain the thing, and this physical form is now devoid of meaning, of life, of purpose. It no longer matters. All I can say, based on the echoes of a faint memory of a desire to help and love others, is this: the canned spaghetti is not spaghetti. Fear the Roggens. Farewell.